The first thing I felt was not pain. It was cold marble against my cheek and 300 people holding their breath. For one strange second, I thought the silence itself might lift me off the floor. Then the pain arrived in pieces. My hip, my palm, the side of my jaw where the stone had kissed it. A high, ringing ache in my teeth. I lay there in the aisle of St. Andrew's with my face turned toward the polished white floor, and the sound of my own breathing seeming far too loud for a room that had gone so still. 10 feet away, my husband was crouched over another woman. He had one hand on her shoulder, like he was the one comforting the injured person. The gesture was so familiar it almost made me sick. He used to touch me that way in the dark when I woke from nightmares. Steady pressure, thumb moving once against skin, a silent promise that the world was still where it had been. The woman was crying so hard she couldn't seem to get a full breath. Her makeup had smeared under both eyes. Her hair, pinned back with something elegant and expensive, had come loose in the struggle and was hanging in her face. She looked younger than I expected at first. 20-something. Small, folded in on herself, one hand pressed to her stomach. Pregnant. That was the word my brain supplied before any other thought had time to land. Not because I understood what was happening, because I didn't. Around us, the church had turned into a painting. The altar flowers were still. The candles were upright and unburning at the edges, their flames small and obedient. Somewhere behind me, a chair scraped once and then stopped. Somewhere ahead, someone gasped and then apologized for gasping, as if that mattered now. James was on his knees beside her, his face twisted with rage that had nowhere to go except upward. "She's carrying my child," he shouted, "not to me, not exactly, but to the church, to the ceiling, to God if God happened to be listening." My husband had never raised his voice like that in public. He looked like a man who had been split open and was trying to hold the pieces together with his hands. I stared at him from the floor and waited for the other part of the sentence. The part that would make this make sense. The part that would tell me who she was, why she was here, why he was touching her the way he was, why he had just said my husband and my child in the same breath with a stranger's body on the marble. Because I had not touched her. That was the second thing I knew with absolute clarity. I had not touched her, but the room was already deciding otherwise. My mother's voice cut through the silence first. "You kicked my daughter." She was halfway down the pew row before I even realized she had stood up. Helen Ashford did not move fast in public unless something had gone very wrong. She moved now like she had forgotten the existence of decorum, of ceremony, of every rule she had spent 68 years learning to obey. "You kicked her," she said again, louder this time, pointing straight at James with a finger that shook from fury. "I saw you." My brother-in-law Paul was already on his feet too, caught between them, one hand on James's arm, the other held out as if he could stop the whole thing by force of will. "James," he was saying, "she didn't touch her. I saw it from here, she didn't." Sure. No one seemed to hear him, everyone heard Sarah. That was her name, apparently. Sarah. I filed it away with the same strange, clinical calm I use when I'm looking at a crack in a wall and trying to decide whether it's cosmetic or structural. Sarah, pregnant, crying on the floor. James kneeling over her like he had the right, my mother furious. Paul trying to hold the center together with one arm and a few useless sentences, and me still on the marble, staring at a scene that belonged to someone else. I could feel the cool stone under my skin through the thin fabric of my dress. Dove gray. I remembered choosing it because it photographed well, because it wouldn't compete with flowers or faces, because I had thought, absurdly, in hindsight, that the day deserved elegance. The hem had picked up a stain of altar water when I went down, a dark bloom near the floor. Even then, even with my heart pounding hard enough to make my ribs ache, my mind latched onto the detail. Damage. That was damage. Here is where it happened. Here is the path of it. Here is what breaks first, and what it costs to repair. A camera light blinked from the side aisle. I turned my eyes just enough to see Thomas, the videographer, frozen behind his rig with one hand on the lens and the color gone out of his face. His second camera sat on a tripod a few feet behind him, red tally light still glowing steadily. Good. Some small practical part of me noticed that the whole thing was being recorded. Good, I thought again, before I knew why I thought it. The organist had not stopped. I could hear the last note of the processional dissolving into nothing, then the faint, awkward rustle of a man deciding whether to keep playing or flee. The poor bastard chose to play. A thin, uncertain hymn drifted through the church, almost comical in its timing, as if music could pretend the afternoon had not just split open. I planted my palm against the floor and pushed myself up, slowly. Not because I was brave, because I had spent too many years holding things together too quickly, and I knew what rushing looked like when it failed. My hip flared hot as I shifted my weight. The pain was real now, a dull, ugly seam down my left side. I let it sit there. There would be time for it later. My mother reached me first. She came down the aisle so fast she nearly lost one of her shoes and caught my arm before I could stand fully. "Let me," she said, and her voice, though shaking, had gone very quiet. That scared me more than her shouting had. James still hadn't looked at me. He was bent over Sarah, one hand braced on the floor now, the other hovering over her stomach as if he could shield whatever was inside her from the air. She kept saying, I didn't mean to, over and over, not to us exactly, but to the room, to herself, to whoever would have the power to believe her. I took one step toward them. My mother tightened her grip on my elbow. "Don't," she said, "only for me. Margaret, don't." I looked at her, then at James, then at the congregation. 300 faces, all turned toward the same point, all wearing the same expression in different versions. Shock, hunger, discomfort, fascination. The kind of look people get when they know they are witnessing something they will repeat for years. Linda from choir had a hand over her mouth. The deacon's wife was openly crying into her program. My father-in-law stood motionless near the altar, with the Bible still open in his hands, the ribbon marker dangling uselessly down the page. Paul was saying my name under his breath like an incantation, trying to pull James back and failing. And James, still kneeling there, still not looking at me, still with his hand on Sarah's shoulder, looked like a stranger I had made the mistake of marrying. I heard myself speak before I had decided to. "James," I said. He didn't answer. James. Still nothing, so I lifted my voice and made it carry. "Look around," I said. "You're going to want to remember this exactly." That did it. Not because he looked up. He didn't, but the room changed. The words settled over the pews and the flowers and the open Bible like smoke. Remember this exactly. Even my mother turned to look at me then, as if she hadn't expected me to be the one standing, as if composure was not a choice but a property I'd inherited from the architecture of my face. I let her take my other arm. Together we walked away, not toward the altar, not toward the front doors. We went the wrong way down the aisle, back through the waiting congregation, past the pale faces and the lifted phones, and the small involuntary movements of people making space for a disaster they had not been invited to understand. No one stopped us. No one followed. The organist, bless him, played through the whole thing with the grim professionalism of a man who had once been paid to survive a flood. Outside, the spring air hit my face like a glass of water. Bright, clean, too normal. The church doors shut behind us with a heavy wooden sound that seemed wildly out of proportion to what had just happened inside. My mother reached for the car keys before I even took them from my clutch. "You drive," I told her, though my voice sounded odd to me, distant and level, as if I were hearing it from the hallway. She stared at me for a beat. Then she nodded once and took the keys from my hand. She had not driven my car in years. She drove it now with both hands tight on the wheel, her jaw set hard enough to crack. We left the church lot and rolled into traffic as if nothing in the world had changed. I watched the city pass in pieces through the window, a man walking a dog, a woman in scrubs carrying coffee, a bus stop with 3 teenagers leaning under the shade of a live oak, a gas station with one broken pump wrapped in yellow tape. The ordinary world kept moving. That was the worst part. It continued to exist while mine had just split down the middle. At the first red light, my mother spoke without looking at me. "Are you hurt?" "I don't know yet. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." She said nothing after that. We drove in silence for several minutes, the kind of silence that only exists between two people who love each other. Enough not to waste words they can't afford. I kept thinking about James's hand on Sarah's shoulder. I kept thinking about the way he had shouted she was carrying his child, as if declaring ownership could somehow erase what I had seen with my own eyes. I kept thinking, who is Sarah? Not who is she to him. I knew that much and didn't know it at all. Who is she in his life that he would put his body between hers and mine? Who is she that he believed her more than me? Why did he look at her like that? Like panic and tenderness had been stitched together in him, and all of it had broken loose at once. And the worst question, the one that kept circling under everything else, did he really think I had touched her? Or had he simply needed the church to believe that so he could explain why his own hands had moved so quickly? By the time we turned onto Roswell Road, my wedding bouquet was already dead in my lap. White roses, peonies, something pale and expensive. I had never learned the names of because I had assumed I would have time. I looked down at the crushed petals and thought, with an ugliness that startled me, that somebody was going to have to clean up the reception. The table linens, the place cards, the cake in the refrigerator at home. Pistachio with raspberry filling, because James had once mentioned a dessert in Savannah 7 years ago, and I had stored it away like a promise. I still hadn't cried. That worried me more than if I had. At the house, the front door was propped open, because the caterers had been coming and going all morning. There were hydrangeas on every surface, and candle sleeves stacked in the foyer, and a row of gift bags lined up near the dining room like a cheerful lie. My mother walked me inside and shut the door behind us. The silence in the house was different from the silence in the church. This one had edges. I went straight upstairs, not to my bedroom but to the master bath, where the air still smelled faintly of perfume and hairspray, and the vanilla candle someone had lit an hour earlier. I turned on the shower, then changed my mind, peeled the dress off over my head, and sat in the bathtub with my knees drawn up while the water ran too hot over my skin. For a while I just sat there, my body was in the tub. My mind was somewhere else entirely, hovering over the scene in the church like a bird that didn't know where to land. I thought absurdly of Daniel, not because it made sense. Because shock is a drawer with no label, and the brain will open whatever it can reach. Daniel had loved chipped beef on toast. I had seen a tin of it in Kroger after he died and stood in the aisle staring at it for so long that a man with a cart had had to go around me twice. I had never made it for him. Not once. It wasn't real food, I had told myself. It was a memory food, a grandfather food, a thing for some other family, and then I had lost him before I had ever said yes. I sat in the tub in my ruined wedding dress and thought about an unopened can in my pantry and understood, with a kind of sick clarity, that my mind had gone searching for the wrong door because the right one was too hard to touch. My mother knocked once, no answer. She knocked again 5 minutes later. "Margaret." I said nothing. On the third try, she opened the door without waiting. She didn't look at me directly. She held a towel up like a curtain and stepped close enough to wrap it around my shoulders when I stood, which I did because she was there, and because I no longer had the energy to resist being handled by someone who knew me. "There you are," she said, and that was somehow the gentlest thing anyone had said all day. She made tea downstairs, the way she always did when I was sick or furious or too tired to speak for myself. English breakfast, 2 sugars, a little milk. The tea of my childhood, not my adulthood, which made me almost laugh and did not quite. I took 1 sip and set the cup down then, because the world apparently wanted one more blow before it gave me room to breathe. My phone buzzed on the counter, a text preview. I looked at the screen and felt the room tilt by half an inch. Sarah. I didn't open it, not then. I just stared at her name in the little rectangular glow, and realized that whatever had happened in that church had not been the whole story. It was only the first visible crack. My mother set the manila envelope on the kitchen island without saying a word. I looked at it, then at her. She sat down across from me, folded her hands, and said, "Before you open that, I need you to know I didn't look inside it first, and you are allowed to be angry with me for having it. I glanced at the envelope again. What is it? The reason I asked you not to ask 6 months ago, she said quietly. My mouth went dry. 6 months ago. The phrase landed like a stone dropped down a well. Because 6 months ago James had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he showered. It had lit up with a message just as I was rinsing a mug. I had read the preview without meaning to, Sarah. Thank you for telling me about Daniel today. Nobody talks about him. It's like he never existed. I had stood there with the phone in my hand and felt something in me go still and careful. Then I had set it back exactly where it had been and finished rinsing the mug. I hadn't asked him who Sarah was. I hadn't asked him why Daniel's name had been spoken by someone who was not me. I hadn't asked because asking would have opened the room I had spent years being shut, and because I knew, with a terrible certainty, that if I asked about Sarah, I would also have to ask about my son. I hadn't been able to do it. My mother slid the envelope toward me. I hired someone, she said. I had to know. I looked at her, at the shaking in her hands she was trying very hard to hide, and for the first time that afternoon, I understood the shape of what had been building around me long before the aisle collapsed. Not just a wedding gone wrong. Something older. Something deliberate. I put my hand on the envelope but didn't open it yet. Because if I opened it, I knew I would have to decide what kind of woman was left at the kitchen island after the church had emptied out. And if I was honest, I wasn't sure I recognized her anymore. I didn't cry in the bathtub. I thought about chipped beef, and that was how I knew my brain was opening the wrong drawer. Not the church, not James, not the woman on the floor with mascara in the creases of her cheeks and my husband's hand on her shoulder like he was holding up a collapsing wall. Chipped beef. A tin can on a grocery shelf. A label I had seen 100 times and never once noticed until the year Daniel died, when grief made a scavenger hunt out of the ordinary world, and I stood in Kroger with a cart full of nothing, staring at a food I had never cooked because it had never seemed like a real meal. It was his grandfather's thing, a Sunday thing, a cheap thing, a thing I had promised myself I would make him someday. Someday never came. I sat in the hot water, with my knees pulled to my chest, and the bath salts from some wedding favor gone glossy in the steam. And I realized my mind was doing what it always did, when the damage was too big to look at directly. It reached sideways. It opened the cabinet marked practical. It took inventory, dress off, water running, ring still on, hip bruised, jaw tender, breath too shallow, no blood that I could see, no broken bones unless something deeper had split and hadn't announced itself yet. That was how I survived most things. By naming them in the smallest possible pieces. From downstairs I could hear my mother moving around the kitchen with the quiet competence of a woman who had decided panic was a luxury item. Cabinet, cup, spoon against porcelain, the tea kettle clicking to life. The house itself had gone eerily still after we came home. Not peaceful, not calm. Just emptied out in the way a room looks after somebody has already taken the furniture and left only the dust outline behind. I stayed in the bath until the water went from hot to unpleasant. I was still there when my mother knocked again. Margaret? No answer. A pause. Then the bathroom door opened and she stepped in without looking directly at the tub, as if respecting my dignity was more important than pretending I was fine. She held a towel up in front of her like a screen. Stand up, she said. I did. My knees trembled. The towel came around my shoulders. She tied it too tightly, which was exactly the kind of thing she did when she was trying not to shake. There, she said. It wasn't comfort, it was accounting. There you are, still here, still breathing, still a person. She made me sit at the kitchen island in the robe. She kept in the upstairs linen closet for me, because my own things had been turned into wedding debris. On the counter in front of me sat a mug of English breakfast tea, with 2 sugars and a splash of milk, exactly how she had made it for 30 years, whenever I was sick, overwhelmed, or too stubborn to admit either one. I wrapped both hands around the mug without drinking. The kitchen looked wrong under fluorescent light. White hydrangeas were arranged in low glass bowls on the island, on the windowsill, on the sideboard near the dining room. Too many flowers for one room, too many rooms for one life. There were taper candles in little brass holders lined up like they were waiting for a ceremony that would never happen. Through the glass door of the refrigerators, I could see the silhouette of the cake box on the middle shelf. Pistachio with raspberry filling. I had chosen it because James had once, years ago, mentioned a dessert in Savannah, and I had saved the detail the way I save blueprints and measurements and offhand sentences people think they can forget after speaking them once. I never forgot anything important. That was the problem. I only forgot to ask whether it still mattered. My phone buzzed on the counter. I looked at it but didn't reach for it. My mother followed my eyes. "Not yet," she said. I let out a breath that was almost a laugh and almost not. "Everyone keeps saying that to me today." She set her own mug down, folded both hands over it, and waited. The silence between us did not feel empty, it felt measured. Finally she said, "I need you to listen to me before you do anything else." That made my stomach go cold in a new way, because my mother did not say things like that unless she had already moved several pieces on the board. I looked at her. "What did you do?" Her jaw tightened. "I'm going to tell you, and then you're going to decide whether you want to hate me. Mom." Margaret. She had the same voice she used with contractors who were trying to talk around a permit violation. "I hired someone," she said. 2 months ago." I stared at her. The room made a small sound around us. Refrigerator motor, kettle settling, the faint click of cooling metal in the walls. "A private investigator?" I asked, because there was no other sane interpretation. She gave one precise nod. My throat went dry. "Why?" "Because I saw James's car at a Dunkin' on Roswell one morning in April," she said, "and because there was a woman in the passenger seat crying while he held her face." I felt the tea mug go slightly slick in my hands. "I didn't know what I was looking at," she said. "Not for certain, but I knew enough to know I didn't like the shape of it." My eyes drifted to the manila envelope on the island beside her mug. It had been there all along. Brown. Unlabeled. The kind of envelope that carries a mortgage statement or a subpoena or a lie you can prove. "I called Miriam Goldberg," my mother went on. "She retired from the bureau 6 years ago. She does private work now. I paid her for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. The phrase landed with an ugly little precision. 2 months ago. 6 weeks. A woman in a car, a hidden file. All of it arranged neatly in time while I had been standing inside the ordinary shape of my own life, not knowing the floor was cut out beneath it. "You didn't tell me," I said. "No. Why not?" She breathed in through her nose, slow and controlled. "Because if I told you too early, you would have felt obligated to act on my fear instead of your own." I stared at her. She continued before I could answer. "And because I needed you to have something besides your own shock if the worst happened." I laughed once then, a short, ugly sound with no humor in it. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "No," she said, "it's supposed to be true." She slid the envelope toward me but did not let go of it. "Open it," she said. I set the mug down. My left hand was shaking a little. I noticed because she noticed and then carefully looked away, which was one more kindness tucked inside the room like a folded napkin. The envelope was heavier than it looked. Inside was a neat stack of papers, a small set of photographs, a printed timeline, copies of emails, a phone number scribbled on the back of a business card, and the kind of brief cover letter private investigators write when they have learned to be concise for a living. Miriam Goldberg, former federal investigator, private consulting, surveillance and records retrieval. The first page was just dates. April 12th, Roswell Road, Duncan. Subject vehicle observed, female passenger in front seat. Subject James Ashford present, April 19th. AutoNation parking lot. Female employee identified, Sarah Chen, administrative assistant, Atlanta corporate office. April 26th, subject seen leaving office building after hours with female employee. May 3, female employee again observed in subject vehicle, weeping. Physical contact documented. May 17, no visual contact, but call records indicate repeated late-night contact from subject's phone to number registered under Sarah Chen. The pages after that got worse in the efficient way facts always do. There were photographs, grainy, telephoto, unromantic. James outside a glass building in a charcoal suit, one hand on the small of Sarah Chen's back as they crossed a parking lot. Sarah Chen at the passenger side of his SUV, face turned away. James with his head bent near hers while she cried in a parked car, her hand over her mouth, as if trying to keep whatever was inside from escaping. Not proof of betrayal. Not exactly. Not the kind you could hold in your hand and point to with certainty. But enough. Enough for a woman who had spent too many years trusting the shape of things instead of the evidence. I turned the page. There was an employment record from AutoNation Corporate, confirming Sarah Chen was not a dealership employee but worked at their Atlanta office in an administrative role. Salary, start date, emergency contact. Beneath it, a note Miriam had typed in plain black font. Subject appears to have frequent access to subject James Ashford's office via documented scheduling assistance. Relationship may predate confirmed contact by several months. May predate. I felt my face go still. My mother watched me read, but she did not speak. Another page, another note, another date, and then, tucked into the back pocket of the folder, a printed screenshot from my own life. I knew it before I even looked at the words. James's phone had lit up on the kitchen counter 6 months ago, while I was rinsing a mug. The preview had shown Sarah's name, and then the line underneath it, visible for maybe 3 seconds before the screen dimmed. Thank you for telling me about Daniel today. Nobody talks about him. It's like he never existed. I had read it. I had set the phone back down. I had finished the mug with water running over my fingers, while my brain apparently chose silence over collapse. Now, on the page, the text sat there in cold black type like evidence from another case. I could feel my mother waiting for me to say something. I said, "You knew about this 6 months ago." "I knew enough to be afraid," she replied. "That's not the same thing." "No, it isn't." I looked up. "Did you read that text?" Her eyes did not move away from mine. "No, you knew it existed." "I knew enough to hire Miriam after that." "After what?" She pressed her lips together, as if deciding how much of the truth was going to hurt, and whether that mattered. "After I saw him leave a coffee shop with Sarah Chen in the passenger seat and saw her crying while he held her face," she said. "After I realized there was a pattern. After I looked at your husband and thought, if I wait for my daughter to notice, I may be too late." The phrase "if I wait for my daughter to notice" lodged under my ribs. I wanted to argue with it. I wanted to tell her that I had noticed, that I had known something was wrong for months, that I had seen the cracks before the church floor opened under all of us. But that would have been a lie. I had seen the cracks and chosen not to touch them, because every crack in my marriage seemed to lead, eventually, to Daniel. And Daniel was the room I still could not enter without the floor giving way. That was the part I did not say out loud. Instead, I turned one more page and found a summary Miriam had written in brisk, unemotional language. Ongoing emotional involvement, probable workplace relationship, evidence of secret contact over a 6-month period, multiple meetings outside work hours, unresolved history with deceased child referenced in text communication. I read the last line 3 times. My son's name sat in the file like a key left under the mat. "Why didn't you tell me that?" I asked. My mother's gaze dropped to the paper and came back. "Because I didn't know if you were ready to hear it from me." "I'm still not sure I'm ready to hear it from anyone." I know, that was the end of that paragraph, apparently. I wanted to scream at the injustice of it, the neatness, the audacity of facts existing before I was prepared for them. Instead, I heard myself ask, "Did you tell anyone else?" "No, not my father. Not yet." "Why not yet?" "Because he would come on the next plane with a golf club and his heart and do something expensive and useless." Despite myself, a sound escaped me that might have been a laugh if my body had had more energy. My mother's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. She had always been better at rage than comfort. Then my phone buzzed again. I flinched so hard the mug jumped on the table. A notification, email. Thomas Kowalski. I hesitated before opening it, because once you start collecting confirmations, there is a point where the facts stop being information and become weather. The message was short. "Mrs. Ashford, I'm sorry to bother you again. I've reviewed the raw footage from camera 1 as well, and I think you should know there is something I didn't notice in the first pass. I'm sending the clip separately. Please do not forward it." I looked up at my mother. She had gone very still. "You asked the videographer?" I said. She held my gaze. "I didn't ask him anything. I gave him your number after the service and told him not to speak unless he wanted to. He called me first." I closed my eyes for 1 second. She said, "Open it." So I did. The video file loaded slow, pixelated for half a second before sharpening into the back aisle of the church. The camera angle was wide enough to show the altar, the first 2 rows, the side pews, the narthex entry, and there it was again, the church, the frozen moment, my husband seeing a woman I did not know, him moving, Sarah backing away, the blur of people rising, but this time the clip had audio from the side mic. I heard James say her name, not Sarah, not loudly, something else. A nickname maybe, a word spoken under his breath that made her look at him like he had stabbed her with it. I replayed the clip, again and again. The line never got clearer, but what came after did. My husband's voice, sharp and sudden. "You don't get to come here now, Sarah," low and shaking. I had to. Then a burst of movement. The camera shook slightly as someone in the pew adjusted. My mother's voice cut in from somewhere off frame, already outraged, already halfway to the aisle, and then Sarah went down. Not as a person struck, not as a person shoved. She folded, sudden and hard, her hand reaching toward the pew, missing it, her body catching itself in the wrong direction. I knew then what the first version of the story had made me doubt only long enough to be cruel to myself. I had not touched her. James had also not been protecting her in the ordinary sense. He had been trying to stop her from saying something, or from being seen, or from telling the church what she knew. I closed the laptop. My mother was watching my face with an expression I couldn't yet name. "What did he say to her?" she asked. "I don't know. You will." I looked at the spread of papers between us and felt the shape of the day stretch wider, older, more deliberate than it had an hour ago. It was not just a wedding disaster. It was the visible break in something that had been splitting from the inside for months, maybe longer, maybe years. I thought of the text again. "Thank you for telling me about Daniel today." The sentence was simple enough to be harmless until you stood it next to everything else and realized it contained a hidden room. "Mom," I said quietly, "how much did you know about Daniel?" She didn't answer right away. That told me something. Not guilt, exactly, not betrayal, but knowledge shaped like a bruise. "I knew he'd been grieving," she said finally. "I knew there were days he couldn't speak his name without leaving the room. I knew you both were making different kinds of peace with it." That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now. It was too late in the day for the first lie to still be useful. I could feel that. The marriage, the church, the hidden texts, the PI file, all of it pointed in one direction, but I wasn't ready to say the word yet. Not aloud. Not to my mother. Not to the tea cooling in front of me. Not to the envelope that had grown heavier every time I touched it. I stood up too quickly and had to brace a hand on the counter. My mother was up in the same second. "Easy. I'm fine." That's a terrible sentence and you know it. I stared at the sink, at the reflection of the hydrangeas in the dark window over it, at the way the room looked almost normal if you didn't know how to read it. A kitchen. A house. A mother and a daughter at an island after a wedding that had disintegrated in public. Nothing in the architecture warned you what had happened inside. "I need air," I said. She nodded, but she did not move aside until she was sure I could stand under my own weight. I went down the hall to the back patio door and stood there with my forehead against the glass for a moment, looking out at the yard while the reception setup sat dying in the dining room behind me. White folding chairs stacked by the side fence. A row of champagne flutes still on the catering table. Gift bags nobody would carry home. The practical aftermath was almost obscene. Somebody would have to call the florist. Somebody would have to cancel the band. Somebody would have to decide what to do with 300 chicken dinners and a cake no one wanted to cut. I had built my life around being the woman who handled those calls. The woman who took the first step. The one who called the plumber, the contractor, the church office, the pharmacy. The one who could estimate load-bearing failure by sight. But this was not a broken pipe. This was a whole concealed wing. I walked back into the kitchen and found my mother standing over the envelope again, one hand resting lightly on the edge of it as if to keep it from drifting away. "Did you know about Sarah before today?" I asked. "No." "Did you know her name?" "No." "Did you know he was talking to anyone?" She hesitated. "Not until I saw them." That was the kind of answer that meant yes in a language you couldn't prosecute. I looked at the file again, then at the text preview page. Something in me had gone numb enough to function. That was the danger zone. The place where you start making plans. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. Her expression sharpened. "What do you want to do?" There it was, the question underneath all the others. I could hear the answer I had not yet earned. I want to throw the file in the trash. I want to call James and demand a version of history that makes sense. I want to ask Sarah why she came to my wedding. I want to go upstairs and lie down in a dark room until the day stops being this day. What I said instead was, "I want to know how long this has been going on." My mother looked at me for a long second. Then she pulled a second folder from the envelope and set it on the counter. There were more pages inside than I had expected. More dates, more photographs, more notes, and on top of all of it, a single yellow sticky note in my mother's handwriting. "Read this last," she had written, as if she knew there would be a moment when the truth would need a landing place. I hadn't opened it yet. I had only just put my hand on the corner of the page when my phone buzzed again, hard enough to rattle against the counter. This time the name on the screen was Sarah. I stared at it while the kitchen seemed to pull in around the edges. Then the preview appeared, and whatever I had thought the woman on the floor was doing at my wedding, it was suddenly clear she was not the end of the secret. She was only the doorway. When I sat across from Sarah, I realized I had spent 6 years not asking the one question that would have changed everything. Not who she was, not what she wanted, not why she was at my wedding. I mean the question that sits underneath all the others, the one that makes a marriage either real or already gone. What have I stopped hearing? I asked my mother to stay home that morning. She didn't argue, which told me she was more worried than she wanted to look. She just handed me my coffee, touched my shoulder once, and said, "If you decide to burn the house down, do it with witnesses." It was the closest thing to a blessing she knew how to give. The lawyer's office was on West Peachtree, all glass, steel, and quiet money. I remember the elevator more than the hallway. The smell of carpet cleaner, my own reflection in the metal doors looking unnervingly composed, like some woman who had gotten dressed for a deposition instead of a collapse. Priya Desai came out to meet me before I reached the front desk. She was shorter than I remembered from the fundraiser, and faster too. Not rushed, just efficient in a way that made the rest of the room seem lazy. "Mrs. Ashford," she said. "Margaret," I answered. She glanced at the envelope under my arm, then at my face. "Come in." Her office was spare, but not cold. One framed certificate, one photograph of a little girl in a soccer jersey, a stack of files aligned with impossible precision. Priya gestured toward the chair across from her desk and sat down only after I did. "Tell me what happened," she said. So I did. Not the whole marriage, not yet, just the church, the fall, the kick, the voices, the camera. The line James had used over and over afterward, the one that had landed like a false headline in my chest. She did not interrupt once. When I finished, she folded her hands on top of the legal pad and looked at me for a long moment. "Do you want the criminal version or the practical one?" she asked. "The practical one. That's smart." I almost laughed. It came out as a breath. She leaned back slightly. "You have video from 2 angles, a public venue, witnesses, and an admission on camera that he used his foot on your body in front of the congregation. If you wanted to make this a criminal matter, you could. Georgia law would not be kind to him. Could I win? Yes." I stared at the desk, at the clean edge of her pen, at the way her office had been arranged for decisions other people couldn't afford to make lightly. "I don't want a trial," I said. "No," she said. "You want consequences." That landed harder than if she had sounded surprised. I looked up. Priya's expression had changed, but only slightly. Less lawyer, more witness. "You don't want your name turned into a public lesson," she continued. You don't want your husband on a local news clip with a bad haircut and a better apology. You want him contained, professionally, socially, and permanently. Yes, you want the people he cannot ignore to know exactly what he did. Yes, and you do not want to look like the person who made this into a spectacle. That was the ugly truth, yes. Not because I was merciful. I wasn't sure mercy was the word. More because I knew what public pain did. It flattened everything into a story with a hero and a villain and a clean little ending. And real life was never that obedient. Real life had children, jobs, mothers, mortgages, and the inconvenient fact that people who hurt each other are sometimes still connected by the same address on tax forms. I want precise consequences, I said. No more than necessary, no less than he deserves. Priya nodded once. Like that had been the answer she expected. She picked up the envelope and opened it with the care of someone handling a cause of death. The file my mother had gathered was all there in orderly stacks. Photos, records, dates, a thin paragraph summary from Miriam Goldberg that read like an autopsy report for a life I had thought was merely tired. Priya laid the pages out between us. "This is good work," she said. "My mother did most of it." "Your mother is frightening in a way I respect. That's the nicest thing anyone has said about her in years." Priya gave the faintest smile and turned the first page toward herself. We went through it line by line. The photographs from the parking lot, the late-night calls, the office visits, Sarah Chen's employment record, the timestamps, the little notes Miriam had made in the margins, clinical and devastating in their restraint. Then Priya paused on the printed text message my mother had found in the back pages. "Thank you for telling me about Daniel today. Nobody talks about him. It's like he never existed." The room changed when she read it. Not visibly, but I felt it. That odd internal shift when a document stops being a document and becomes a knife in a shape that recognizes you. Priya looked up. "He said Daniel's name to her." "I know. Did he ever say it to you?" "Yes." "Before or after the message?" I swallowed. "Both. Before. Sometimes." "Not much. And after?" I had to think about it. The answer was so obvious it made me feel stupid. "Less," I said. Priya set the paper down. "That matters. It matters how? It matters because this isn't only about infidelity, or emotional attachment, or whatever version of truth he prefers when he has to explain himself. It's about concealment. It's about a pattern. If he was using grief as a private refuge with someone at work, that does not excuse the kick, but it explains why the day in the church detonated so fast." I stared at her. "That sounds almost generous." "It isn't generosity, it's strategy." She slid a notepad toward herself and started writing. "Here's what I recommend," she said. "No criminal complaint unless you decide later you want one. For now, we build pressure where he lives. Employment, church, family. Not the internet, not social media, not a public pile-on. Those things burn bright and fast and they make fools of everybody, including the person who was harmed. Then what? Then we make the institutions that matter to him respond." I watched her write. "AutoNation gets the footage and a formal complaint. The church gets the same. His brother gets the truth from you, not from rumor. We file for divorce immediately. We protect your assets. We make sure he cannot rewrite this as a misunderstanding, and we do it in a way that keeps your name out of a tabloid frame." I said, "Can I do that?" "You can do anything you can document." That sentence stayed with me. Anything you can document. It felt like the first honest rule of the day. Priya looked at the envelope again. "There's one more thing. You're going to be tempted to ask every question at once. Don't. Ask the useful ones first. What's the difference? The useful ones move you forward." I thought about that while she printed out a retention agreement and walked me through the pieces with a voice so calm it almost made me furious. Filing schedule, temporary financial separation, preservation of records, notification order, who hears what first and why. When she said witness statement, I thought of the church. When she said paper trail, I thought of James's phone on the kitchen counter. When she said likely termination, I thought of him in a suit at an altar with his hand on a woman's shoulder. And when she said, "Do you want to pursue a full social response or keep it limited?" I realized what she meant. The church would hear. His employer would hear. His brother would hear. But the rest of the world would not. Not if I could help it. I didn't want his shame to become a public sport. I wanted it to become impossible for him to pretend the room had not seen him. I want the people who have to share space with him to know exactly what they're looking at, I said. But I don't want strangers weighing in. Priya nodded. That's a clean line. It doesn't feel clean. No line involving betrayal ever does. I signed what she put in front of me. When I finished, she took the pages, clipped them together, and said, "You're in shock, by the way. Excellent. I'm serious. So am I. No, you're not." I looked at her. Her face softened a fraction. "You are presenting as functional because you're good at surviving through organization. That's not the same thing as being fine." It was infuriating how quickly she could see it. I said, "I know. You'll know it more later." Comforting. "It's not meant to be." She stood, came around the desk, and handed me a business card with her direct number written on the back. "Do not let your mother or your husband or your own panic decide what happens next," she said. "You call me before you react. Every time." "Every time?" "Yes. That's what I'm paid for." I almost asked her how much shock insurance cost, but the joke died before it reached my mouth. Instead, I said, "Thank you." She gave me a look that was not unkind. "Get your head on straight. Then go hear the rest." "The rest?" "The woman who showed up at your wedding didn't do that for entertainment. If she asked for you, there's a reason." I left her office with the file under my arm and the feeling that a door had opened somewhere behind me that I could never close again. Sarah lived in Midtown, in one of those old walk-ups with brick walls and narrow stairs and a buzzer that never sounds like it should belong to a human life. The building had a Thai place on the ground floor, and the smell of garlic and oil was drifting out into the hallway when I climbed the first flight. I was alone. My mother had offered to come. I told her no, not because I didn't want her there, because I did, and that was exactly why she couldn't be. The apartment was on the 4th floor, or maybe the 3rd if you counted the level where the stairs split. I rang the bell and waited with the file tucked against my side like a shield. My pulse was steady enough to insult me. When Sarah opened the door, she looked like someone who had not slept in days and had not expected to be forgiven for it. No makeup. Hair pulled back loosely, oversized cardigan swallowed around her shoulders. She was younger than I wanted her to be, tired in a way that was not theatrical. She saw my face, and a flicker of something crossed hers. Not fear, not exactly. Relief, maybe, or the beginning of whatever comes after you've been bracing for a meeting and know it cannot be postponed any longer. She stepped back from the doorway. "Come in." I did. The apartment was smaller than I expected. One living room, one kitchen nook, one folding table near the window, a second-hand couch with a blanket draped over the arm, a pair of shoes by the door, a kettle on the stove. A single framed picture on the shelf of an older woman beside a child I assumed was not a child anymore. Sarah saw me look at it and said, "My mother." I nodded once. "I'm Margaret, I know." Of course she did. We stood there for a moment in the center of the room, both of us understanding that there was no version of this conversation that would not hurt. She gestured toward the chair opposite the couch. "Please." I sat. She stayed standing long enough to turn off the burner under the kettle, then sat on the couch with her hands folded in her lap like she was afraid to use them. For a while neither of us spoke. I had spent the last 24 hours imagining her as a shape in a church aisle, a shadow, a reason, a problem. A woman crying on the floor while my husband bent over her like she was more urgent than the ceremony, more urgent than me, more urgent than all of it. Up close, she was just a woman, a scared one, a tired one. "I wasn't trying to ruin your wedding," she said. I let the sentence sit there a second. "That's a very low bar." She winced. "I know." "What were you trying to do?" Her eyes dropped to her hands. "Stop what?" "The ceremony." "Why?" She swallowed. "Because James wasn't going to tell you." The room held still. The air conditioner clicked on and then off again. Somewhere in the building a door shut. I heard my own breathing. "Tell me what?" I said. Sarah looked up then, and for the first time her face did what faces do when a person has run out of room for the version they were telling themselves. What he told me about Daniel, she said quietly. And what he didn't tell you. That made the room tilt. I didn't speak. She took that as permission, or as the only path left. He started talking about your son almost a year ago, she said. Not all at once. Little things at first. A drawing on his wall, a photograph on his desk, a bridge Daniel drew when he was 10. I felt my hands go cold. He said the office was the only place where he could say Daniel's name out loud without having to watch someone else's face change, she continued. He said you got up and left whenever he tried to talk about him at home. I sat very still. That's not the whole truth, I said. No, she replied. It's not. She folded and unfolded her fingers once. But it was enough for me to think he was the saddest man I had ever met. I said nothing. She stared at the carpet between us. My mother died last year. Pancreatic cancer. Fast. 10 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. I went to work 3 days later because I didn't know what else to do with myself, he noticed. The tone of her voice changed when she said he noticed. Not romantic. Not yet. Just the kind of softness that comes from being seen at exactly the wrong time. He asked if I was sleeping, she said. I told him not much. He asked if I was eating. I lied. Then one day, he asked me whether I ever got tired of being the only person in a room who could keep the whole thing from falling apart. I felt something tighten at the base of my throat. That was the first thing he said to me that felt true, she said. Not kind. True. I looked away. Sarah went on, quieter now. He told me about Daniel because I asked about the photo on his desk. He cried, not politely, not in a controlled way, he just broke open. I didn't move. I sat there and listened while he told me your son died in 2020, and that no one in his house said his name anymore. I heard the blood in my ears. That isn't what he said to me, I said, though I knew she wasn't lying. No, she said, I know. The silence after that was long enough for me to feel the shape of the room around us. She kept going because she had already crossed the line where stopping would have been cruel. He didn't tell me that part to hurt you, she said. I don't think he even understood he was doing it. He told me because I asked a question, and because he was starving to talk about him. That's the truth. Whatever came after, that's the truth too. I watched her face while she spoke. There was no triumph in it, no appetite for destruction. Just an exhausted kind of honesty, the kind people only find when they've already been ruined by the thing they're confessing. You were seeing him, I said. Yes, for how long? She hesitated. Long enough to know it was wrong. Try again. 7 months as a friend, longer as something else. The words settled in the room. 7 months. My brain reached automatically for calendar arithmetic, the way it always did when pain became too large. This morning, last fall. Spring, before the wedding plans, before the dress fitting, before the cake, before I was foolish enough to think the ceremony meant the marriage was still waiting for me. Did you sleep with him? I asked. Her face tightened, but she didn't recoil. Yes. The honesty of it hit harder than a denial would have. I nodded once, though I wasn't sure to what. And did you know he was married? Yes. And did you care? She flinched finally. Not in the way you mean. That's not reassuring. No, it isn't. We were both quiet again. Then she said, I should have stayed away the second I knew. I didn't. Why not? Her voice thinned. Because he was already falling apart. Because I thought I was the only person in his life who was letting him say the ugly parts out loud. Because he made it sound like your marriage was already a memory. The phrase made me look up. Already a memory? She nodded once, miserable now. He said you two had learned how to keep the house standing by not bringing anything painful into it. He said you were both experts at being polite to each other in the rooms that mattered. That was the first time she had said something that landed exactly where it was meant to. I didn't know whether I wanted to be angry at James or ashamed of being understood by a stranger. Then why come to the church? I asked. Sarah's eyes filled, but the tears stayed where they were. Because I was scared he was going to let you marry him without telling you he was already gone. I felt the sentence move through me slowly. Already gone. He'd been there. He'd paid bills. He'd fixed things. He'd stood beside me in photos. He'd made coffee and bought anniversary flowers and gone to work and come back and taken off his shoes in the mudroom like habit, could stand in for presence. And all the while, according to her, he had already left. You could have called, I said. I know. You could have told me in private, I know. You could have walked away, I know. She said it 3 times like a confession she had already tried to pay for and failed. I looked at the floor, then at the small coffee table beside her couch. There was a half-finished prenatal vitamin bottle near a stack of mail. I didn't look at it long enough to be certain, but I saw enough. How far along are you? I asked. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach before she caught herself. 12 weeks. So there it was. The piece of the story that had been shaping itself in the church aisle and under my mother's envelope and inside James' sudden violence. Pregnant. Not symbolic. Not rumor. Real. I let out a breath through my nose. Did he know? Yes. When? A month ago. Did he tell you to come to the wedding? No. Then why were you there? Her eyes shut for a second. Because he told me he was going to stand up there and say vows to you, and keep pretending he could make 2 lives fit in one house, and I thought if I waited until after, he would disappear into politeness again, and I would be the only one carrying the truth. The words hung between us. Not innocence. Not guilt either. Something messier. Something that still hurt. I leaned back in the chair and looked at her properly for the first time, not as a rival, not as a headline, but as a woman who had made a series of bad decisions inside somebody else's disaster. You should have told me, I said. Yes. Before the church, yes. Before the dress, yes. Before he made me stand there in front of 300 people and let me look like the fool in my own life. She closed her eyes. Yes. There was no point continuing down that road. We both knew where it led. So I asked the question I had been avoiding since the text on the phone, and the picture in the envelope, and the way James had looked at Sarah in the church, like she was carrying the only live wire in the room. Why did he talk to you about Daniel? Sarah opened her eyes. For the same reason he talked to me about everything else, she said. Because I listened. That answer should have made me angry. Instead, it made me tired, not because I was jealous, because I understood. James had found a woman who made room for his grief without asking him to build anything with it. He had found a chair that did not get up, a witness who did not leave, and because I knew him, because I had lived with him, because I had married him when he was still capable of looking me in the eye and making promises, I could see exactly how dangerous that would feel to a man who had been hollowing himself out in silence. He had not cheated because he was a movie villain. He had cheated because he wanted to be held where his brokenness lived. That did not make it noble. It made it human. And human was, infuriatingly, harder to punish cleanly. Sarah reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a folded tissue, then seemed embarrassed by it. She did not use it. She just held it. He said you would leave if he ever brought Daniel up in front of you, she said. He said you had a way of going somewhere else in the room whenever the subject came near. I stared at her. He said that? Yes. I felt the old defensive reflex rise in me, the one that wanted to say I had been protecting us, protecting him, protecting the shape of the life we had built from a pain we could not afford to unleash in the middle of a weekday dinner. But the room was too quiet for lies, so I said, I did leave. Sarah nodded, as if that were the most important thing in the room. I hated that she was right, and hated more that I had known she might be. You want absolution, I said. She looked at me directly. No, what do you want? Her answer came too fast to be rehearsed. For him to stop pretending I was the beginning of this. That was the first thing she had said all afternoon that made the center of my chest go hard. Because it was the closest thing to truth I had heard. She continued, softer now. I know what I did. I know it was wrong. I know I'm not the victim of your marriage. I'm not asking you to call me innocent. I'm asking you not to let him make me the whole story so he can stay hidden inside the part he broke before I ever touched them. I looked at her for a long time. Then I said, how long had he been detached from home before you? She didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. Finally she said, a while. How long is a while? She hesitated. Since before I knew him well enough to name it. The room blurred slightly at the edges. Before I knew him well enough to name it. That could mean a year. 2. 5, maybe longer. Maybe all the years I had mistaken endurance for marriage. I thought of the nights I had spent in my office with plans spread across the desk while James sat downstairs with the television low. The dinners that had become polite. The conversations that moved around the center of things instead of through them. The way grief had turned us into careful tenants in the same house. Not lovers, not enemies, just people making noise in different rooms. I suddenly understood why the church felt so unbearable. It had not exposed a happy marriage gone momentarily wrong. It had exposed the fact that we were already strangers long before the aisle collapse gave everyone a reason to look. I rose slowly from the chair. Sarah looked up at me, startled. "Did you come here to ask me to apologize?" she said. "No." "Then why did you come?" I stood there with the file still under my arm, with Priya's card in my pocket, and my mother's warnings in my head, and the taste of cheap tea from the morning still somewhere in my mouth. "I came," I said, "because I needed to know whether he was lying to me, or whether I had been living inside a lie for years." Sarah's face changed then. Something in it went quiet and old. And I looked at her apartment, the prenatal vitamins, the unpaid bill on the table, the photograph of her mother, the folding couch, the cup in the sink, the ordinary exhausted life of a woman who had made herself available to a man already half gone. "And I think," I said carefully, "he was gone before you ever showed up." She closed her eyes. I don't know whether that hurt her more than anything I had said before. It probably should have. But the truth, once spoken, does not pick sides. It just clears the room. I walked to the door. Behind me, Sarah said my name. I stopped, but I didn't turn around yet. "I'm sorry," she said, and this time it sounded like the poorest tool she had left. I turned then. She was still on the couch, one hand on her stomach now, without any pretense of not doing it. She looked tired enough to be honest and brave enough to be dangerous. "I know," I said. It was not forgiveness. It was not permission. It was simply the only true thing left in the room, and when I stepped back into the hallway and let the door close behind me, I understood with a cold, clean certainty that I no longer wanted Sarah's confession. I wanted James in one room, with no exits, and I wanted him to answer for every silence he had ever built. I turned the laptop toward him and said, "Now you can talk." He looked at the screen like it might open its mouth first. It was Sunday, 3:57 in the afternoon. The house had that strained, over-polished quiet that comes right before a storm breaks or a verdict lands. My mother had gone to the grocery store to give us space, which was her version of mercy. The legal folder was on the counter. My coffee had gone cold beside it. I was standing at the island in a gray sweater and jeans, hair clipped back, shoes still on, because this was not a moment that belonged to softness. James came in through the mudroom like he was entering a room where he already knew the furniture had been moved. He stopped when he saw me. Not because I looked angry, because I didn't. That seemed to unsettle him more. He'd shaved too quickly. There was a rough line along his jaw where the razor had missed. He looked thinner than he had 3 days ago. Not in the body exactly, but in the way his shoulders sat under his shirt, as if gravity had started working more honestly on him. "Margaret," he said, "sit." He glanced at the stool across from me. "Can I sit down, James?" He sat, not gracefully, not with confidence. He lowered himself like a man preparing for a dentist appointment and set his hands on his knees as if they might keep him from sliding off the chair. I didn't sit. I wanted the height. I wanted him looking up for once. I turned the laptop toward him, and the screen lit his face in a hard blue rectangle. "Watch," I said. He swallowed once. I hit play. At 08, Sarah stepped into the church narthex. At 019, he saw her. At 023, he left the altar. At 041, I entered through the main doors with my father. At 052, he reached her near the back by the baptismal font. At 14, her head tipped. At 16, she went down on her own. At 18, I was still a full 9 feet away. At 111, she said the sentence that started all of this. At 114, his leg came up. I had counted it so many times it lived in my body now. 14 seconds. 14 seconds from the fall to the kick. 14 seconds in which nobody could have honestly believed I had touched her. least of all the man who'd just used his foot on my side in front of 300 witnesses and then called it something else. James didn't speak while it played. His jaw locked harder at the second viewing. He did not move until I stopped the video and the room went black again. "Now," I said, "you can talk." He stared at the dark laptop screen. For a long time nothing happened. The refrigerator clicked on. Somewhere in the house, event side. Outside, a car passed too slowly on the street and then kept going. Those ordinary sounds felt indecent in a room like this. Finally, he said, "You had footage, 2 angles." He nodded once, like the fact of that had rearranged a few bones in him. "From both cameras?" "Yes." "And you watched them?" "Yes." He let out a breath, thin and damaged. "Many times." That answer made him look at me. "Were you trying to catch me in a lie?" "No," I said. I was trying to find out whether you had already built your defense before the altar flowers finished dying." His face changed then. A flinch, but smaller than that too. "Recognition?" I reached for the folder and opened it. The documents inside had been arranged in the kind of order that makes panic look amateur. Priya's order. My mother's order. My own order. It was the order of someone who had decided not to be emotional until the numbers were done. "Here's where we are," I said. He didn't interrupt. "Priya filed the engagement draft this morning. It becomes official as soon as I send the final authorization. The divorce is no fault on paper, but we both know that's a polite lie." His eyes stayed on the folder. "The house is going on the market Tuesday. Julie Ramirez has already been contacted. I'm retaining the equity split, the retirement accounts are being divided, and you can have your clothes, your golf clubs, your stupid blue chair from the den, and the Lake Lanier canoe you never used because you hate silence on water." I heard the tiniest sound in his throat, but I didn't stop. "You will move out by Friday. If you don't, Priya files for temporary possession. The legal language gets colder after that." He looked up. "You've really done all this?" "Yes." I could feel my pulse under my ribs, steady as a metronome. "The video is going to 3 places tomorrow morning at 9, I said. AutoNation Corporate HR, Pastor Williams, Paul. He closed his eyes for a second. "That will end my job." "Yes." He didn't argue. That was almost worse. "You'll be terminated inside a week," I said. "Probably sooner. In your industry in this city, that job doesn't come back once it's gone. Not at that level." He rubbed one hand over his mouth. "You sound very calm." "I'm not calm. I'm structured." That got a short, bitter laugh out of him, but it died before it formed completely. "And the church?" he asked. "Peachtree Methodist will do what churches do. They'll call it a season of discernment or restoration or some other phrase that lets them keep their carpets clean while they move you quietly into a room with no windows. Pastor Williams will protect the congregation first, you second, and the truth somewhere around page 6. He nodded slowly. "Paul," I said, "will hear it from me before he hears it from anyone else. Not because I'm generous, because if there's one room you don't get to sneak into after this, it's the room where your brother has to piece together your life from rumors." At that, he finally looked at me fully, not with anger, with something closer to dread. "You're serious about all of it." "Dead serious." He exhaled through his nose, eyes on the tabletop now. "Priya's your lawyer?" "Yes. She's going to enjoy this. She's a professional." "That's not an answer." "No," I said. "It's the only one you get." He sat back a fraction, then forward again, then still. He looked like a man trying to find the right version of himself to put on the table and realizing he had run out. "I didn't mean to kick you," he said finally. "I know." The honesty of that answer seemed to surprise him. It should have. It was not forgiveness, not even close. It was just the truth that there are things more useful than denial. He looked at the laptop, still dark. "You said there was a video." "There is. I meant, I know it looks like I did. But I didn't mean to. You swung your leg at my body in front of God and 300 people," I said. "Intent is not exactly where we're shopping for comfort right now." That hit. His eyes dropped to his hands. I watched him sit with it. Priya had told me not to waste the first 24 hours trying to get a clean explanation from a dirty wound. So I didn't rush. I let the silence do what it was built for. Then I said, "Start with Sarah." His head came up too fast. "What about her?" Tell me why she was in the church. He rubbed Hal's palms against his thighs once, like he was preparing to touch something hot. She came because she thought I was going to tell you. That much I gathered. He stared at the counter. I was going to. Were you? Yes. Before the vows? He didn't answer. That was answer enough. I opened the folder and slid the printed text message across the marble between us. The one my mother had found. The one that had gone from digital ink to evidence in less than a day. Thank you for telling me about Daniel today. Nobody talks about him. It's like he never existed. Explain that, I said. He looked at the page and closed his eyes. Sarah noticed the photo on my desk. He said, I know. I used to keep it near the phone. I know that too. He opened his eyes again, but not to me, to the page. She asked who it was. I told her. You told her about Daniel. Yes, did you tell me? He didn't answer right away. His throat moved once. I tried, he said. Not enough. I tried and then I stopped trying. I said nothing. Voice lower now, stripped of the false confidence he used at work, the voice he used when he was smoothing over a deal, or calming a customer, or telling people a thing was under control when it absolutely was not. I said his name to her, and she just sat there. She didn't look away. She didn't rescue me from it. She didn't do that thing where people lean in too fast and then get weird and sad and embarrassed. She stayed. I felt something sharpen inside my chest, but I didn't interrupt. She asked questions, he said. Real questions. About the accident, about the funeral, about what I remembered. And I talked, more than I had in years. The room got very still. Go on, I said. He nodded once. She was the first person I felt like I could talk to without having to manage her reaction. That landed harder than it should have. Because I knew exactly what he meant. He had always hated watching people watch him. Hated pity, hated caution, hated the little tightening in someone's face when Daniel's name entered a room. He'd stopped bringing it up because every time he did, the conversation became about everyone's discomfort except his grief. And I had made that worse, not because I was cruel, because I was afraid. I let him keep going. She told me her mother had died. Pancreatic cancer. Fast. And I thought. He stopped, searching for a word that might not embarrass him. You thought what? I thought she understood what it was like to lose somebody and then have the whole world expect you to keep functioning in the same shape. I looked down at the envelope, at the stacked pages, at the neat corners of the evidence that had been waiting to become a story. And that turned into an affair, I said. He winced. Yes, why? He actually laughed once then, but it was ugly and short. You really want the clean answer? I want the truth. He nodded, almost to himself. I was lonely. That's not the truth. That's the front door. His eyes flicked up to mine and away again. All right, he said. The truth is I liked being in a room where Daniel could be mentioned and nothing shattered. That sat between us like a dropped glass. I liked that she didn't look at me like I was trying to break something every time I said his name. He went on. I liked that she asked about him. I liked that she remembered things. I liked that she did not leave the room. His voice changed on the last sentence. Not louder, worse, smaller. I saw it then, not for the first time, but more clearly than before, the shape of the damage. He had not simply drifted into an affair. He had gone looking for a place where grief did not have to be translated into polite, manageable sentences. And Sarah, for all the wrongness of it, had been the first person in years who let him stop performing the version of himself that could still function. You should have ended the marriage, I said. I know. Before her. I know. Before you made me stand at an altar while you were already halfway out the door. He nodded, eyes closed now. I could have stopped there. I could have stayed on the practical facts and let the moral damage remain in its documented place. But there was still something under this that hadn't been named yet, and I could feel it pressing from below. So I said, Why did you kick me? His jaw flexed. For a second he looked like he might refuse. Then he put both hands flat on the counter and stared at them as if they belonged to someone else. Because I panicked, he said. That's still not the whole answer. No, his voice got quieter. Because I saw her on the floor, and for 1 second I thought she had pushed past me. And for another second I thought you had touched her. And for another second I thought, If I don't put this on somebody right now, the whole room is going to see exactly what this is. I waited. He kept talking. I didn't think about you first. That's obvious. His mouth tightened. I thought about the fact that I had one woman crying on the floor and another walking toward me in a dress, and my brain just collapsed into itself. He rubbed at his forehead with the heel of one hand. But that's not the full truth either. No kidding. He looked at me then, really looked. The full truth is, I saw Sarah fall. And I saw you, standing there, and something in me snapped because the last time I watched a woman fall apart in front of me, I was the one who stayed standing. And I decided that if I ever let myself sit in that again, I would never get back up. I didn't say anything. He swallowed hard. The night Daniel died, he said, I went upstairs to check on you. You were on his bed. You had his jacket in your lap. You were saying his name over and over. I felt the room tilt by a degree. He was still looking at his hands. I stood in the doorway and watched you, he said. And I knew if I walked into that room, I would not know how to come back out. Someone had to hold the house up. You were already gone in there. I chose not to go with you. My fingers tightened on the edge of the folder. He kept speaking, and now his voice had the flatness of a confession he had rehearsed in the dark. So I made a decision that night. I told myself I'd be the structure. You'd be the grief. I'd keep paying the bills, keep the house running, keep the outside world from seeing us come apart. I stared at him. He gave a tiny shake of his head. I told myself that was love. The sentence hit me so hard it almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was obscene. You never said any of that to me. I know, you just became a ghost. He flinched. Yes, and you thought that was better. I thought it was necessary. For who? He didn't answer. I already knew. For him. He sat very still while the refrigerator hummed behind him, and the air in the kitchen seemed to thicken around all the things we had not said in 6 years. You were grieving, Daniel, I said slowly, and you turned into a person who lived in the same house as me but refused to enter the parts of it where he was still real. He nodded once. Yes, and I was building walls. His eyes closed. Yes, he said. That was the part I hadn't wanted to hear, and also the part I had already known somewhere in my body. Because he was right. That was the thing about marriages that break quietly. They don't always break from betrayal first. Sometimes they break from 1,000 tiny acts of self-defense. I had made a temple out of productivity, out of plans, out of useful conversations and closed doors and carefully managed grief. I thought if I stayed useful, I would stay strong. I thought if I never fell apart, then maybe neither would he. Instead, we became experts at avoiding the only room that mattered. I looked at him across the island and saw not a villain, not exactly, and not a victim either. Just a man who had mistaken absence for protection and called it devotion. He was crying now, though quietly enough that he might have hoped I wouldn't notice. I noticed. He wiped at one cheek with the side of his hand and kept his eyes down. I didn't stop loving you, he said. I almost answered with anger. Almost. But the truth was more complicated than that, and I was too tired to pretend otherwise. I know, I said. That made him look up. I held his gaze. I didn't stop loving you either, I said. That's what made it take so long to die. He shut his eyes hard. The room seemed to narrow around us after that. Not from the words themselves, from the fact that they were finally true. I flipped the next page in the folder and laid it flat on the counter. The terms, the consequences, the clean, merciless arithmetic of a life coming apart in legal language. Here's what happens next, I said. He straightened slightly, like a man hearing a judge begin sentence. Tomorrow morning, the email goes out, the footage, the report, the notice. AutoNation will terminate you. They'll call it conduct unbecoming, or a violation of values, or some corporate phrasing that lets them pretend they discover conscience at 9 o'clock in the morning. He gave a miserable little breath through his nose. Pastor Williams will probably ask for a private meeting before he says anything in public. He will be concerned about the congregation, the building, the donors, the youth committee, and whatever language he can use to make a scandal sound like pastoral care. James stared at the counter. Paul will be furious at first, I said. Then he'll be disappointed. which somehow is worse. He'll come around eventually, because he loves you and because brothers are built to forgive the wrong things first. At that, James closed his eyes again. And me? He asked. What about you? What do I do? I looked at him a long moment. You move out by Friday, you answer your lawyer, you sign what Priya sends you. You do not call me crying from a hotel or from Paul's couch or from whatever bar you think you can disappear into for an hour. You sit in what you made. His eyes opened. I know this feels like punishment, I said. It's not, it's accountability. The difference is you can survive one and still become a person. The other just teaches you how to lie better. He sat back then, his face gone pale beneath the kitchen light. Do you hate me? He asked. It was such a small question compared to all the machinery around it that I almost pitied him for asking. No, I said. He looked startled by that. I don't have the energy for hate, I said. Hate would mean you still occupied the center of me. That landed exactly where it was meant to. He nodded once, like a man accepting something he can't correct. Then he said, very quietly, I thought if I kept us standing, it would count for something. I held that for a second. It did, I said, until it didn't. He looked down. I don't know how to fix any of this. You don't. That made him look up again. I'm not asking you to fix it, I said. I'm telling you the fixing part is over. You're in the part where you answer for it. His throat moved. For the first time all afternoon he looked exactly his age. Not older, not younger. Just 43 years old and tired in the bones. I should have told you about Daniel, he said. Yes. I should have told you I was drowning. Yes. I should have told you I was angry that you kept making the house feel like a project plan instead of a place we were allowed to bleed in. That one hit and he saw it. He did not back away. I should have told you I was terrified, he said. I should have told you I didn't know how to be your husband and a father to a dead boy at the same time. The room was very quiet now. I heard a bird outside the window. One sharp call and then silence. Did you ever think, I said, that I was terrified too? He looked at me like he had forgotten that fear was not a private room. Every day, he said. Did you ever ask? No. Did you ever notice that when you went quiet, I got louder with plans because I thought if I could just organize the grief out of the air, you might come back to me? He covered his mouth with one hand. No, he said, though it sounded like shame, not ignorance. And I didn't ask because every time I came close to Daniel, you disappeared into the garage, or the office, or the yard. And after a while I started believing that silence was the only thing keeping the roof from collapsing. He was crying openly now. Not theatrically. Just failing to hold it in, I let him. That, more than anything, was the difference between us in that moment. I had learned how to make room for pain without running from it. He was only now learning that pain did not become smaller because you stopped looking at it. You became a ghost, I said, and I became a wall. We built the same house from opposite sides and then acted surprised when no one could live in it. His face folded at that, not all at once. Slowly, like paper in rain. I'm sorry, he said. I believed him. That was the worst part. Not because it changed anything. Because it didn't. Because it was real and late and useless in the way all true apologies are when the damage has already ripened into history. I know, I said. He sat there staring at the counter while the whole shape of his life narrowed to a few things he could not undo. The video, the church, the job, Sarah, the son whose name he'd held back until it became a weapon, and me, standing across from him with a legal folder in my hand and enough calm to frighten him. Then he said, What happens with the baby? I had expected that question earlier. I hated that it came now. You don't get to ask that like it's a logistics problem, I said. He flinched, deservedly. Sarah will have the child, I said. You will be involved. Legally, practically, however the court and the reality of the situation arrange it. But you don't get to use that baby as a bridge back into this house. I wasn't trying to. No? He looked ashamed enough to answer honestly. Maybe I was hoping you'd tell me it wasn't over. I was quiet for a beat. Then I said, James, it was over long before Sarah walked into your office. He shut his eyes again. That was the final truth in the room, and we both knew it. Not because she was innocent. She wasn't. Not because he was evil. He wasn't. Because the marriage had been hollow for so long that the first loud thing that happened to it only made the emptiness visible. He leaned back, exhausted now in a way I recognized from grief clinics and funeral homes, and the nights after Daniel died when no one could bear another sentence. "I loved him," he said suddenly. I knew he meant Daniel. Still, hearing it spoken in this kitchen felt like a door opening in a house I had kept shut for years. "I know you did." I never stopped. "I know," he swallowed, "but every time I tried to say his name at home, you looked like I was taking something from you." The truth of that sank between us slowly. I didn't deny it, because there were moments I had felt exactly that. Not because Daniel belonged to me more than to him, because my grief had been so unsteady, so humiliating, that hearing the name out loud made it real in ways I couldn't control. And control had been the only thing I trusted. I thought if I let myself say it too much, I said, I'd lose the only shape I had left. He nodded as if he understood too well. That was when I realized what was gone between us was not love exactly. It was permission. Permission to be weak. Permission to be wrecked. Permission to sit down in the middle of the wreckage and say the child's name without turning it into a threat. We had denied each other that for years. So when Sarah came along, she hadn't created the wound. She had simply stood in the opening where the wound already was and offered him a place to bleed that didn't ask him to be strong. That did not excuse him, but it explained him, and explanations, inconveniently, can coexist with consequences. I slid the folder closer to him. "Read it tonight," I said. "Sign tomorrow morning. Priya's office by 11. Don't bring a lawyer unless you want one to watch you lose in a more expensive chair." He gave a wet, humorless breath that might once have been a laugh. I pushed the last page toward him. "Your employment notice will go tomorrow. Pastor Williams will get the video and the letter. Paul will get a call from me before lunch. If you want to tell him anything, do it before then." He put his hand on the folder but didn't pick it up. "Margaret, don't, I just know." He looked up. "I'm going to miss you." The sentence was so late it almost made me angry. Instead, I felt tired. "You already did," I said. "You just didn't know when it started." That was the end of the useful conversation. I knew it because his face changed. Not closed, exactly, completed. There are some truths that do not need more room. They just need the courage to be left where they land. He took the folder. His hands shook this time. Mine didn't. He stood. For a second he stayed there, with the papers under his arm and the rest of his life visibly receding behind him. Then he said, "The baby is a girl." I looked at him. "Sarah told you?" "Yes." He nodded, still not quite meeting my eyes. "She's going to name her Maya." That one hung there. Maya, a name that existed already somewhere in the future while the rest of us were still standing in the aftermath. I gave a short nod. "Then she'll be Maya." He opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded too. He turned toward the mudroom. I watched him go, one step at a time, carrying the documents that would end his job, his public face, and whatever version of dignity he had left. He reached the door, then stopped. He looked back once, as if he might still find a sentence that would bridge the gap between what had happened and what couldn't be repaired. Instead, he said, "I'm sorry about Daniel." I held his gaze. "I know," I said. And because I had learned something by then about what can and cannot be carried, I added, "Say his name out loud before you leave." James went still. Then he nodded once, very small. "Daniel," he said. It was quiet, barely more than breath. But it was said. He went out through the mudroom, and I heard the shoes by the door, the interior latch, the garage opening, and then the car backing down the drive. The engine caught. It lingered. Then it pulled away. The house settled. Not peacefully. Just finally, momentarily, alone. I stood where I was for a long time. The laptop was still open on the island. The video screen had gone dark. The folder lay half unsealed where he'd left it. Outside, a bird was calling from the pecan tree at the edge of the yard. Somewhere far off, a lawnmower started up and then disappeared behind a fence. I could have stayed there. Instead, I walked down the hall, past my office, past the guest room, to the closed door at the end, Daniel's room. I put my hand on the knob and turned it, and that was the first time I let myself fall apart. 11 months later, I saw my ex-husband in a diner and realized the life that broke had not disappeared. It had simply changed shape. He was sitting through booths from the window, with a paperback propped open in one hand and a coffee mug in the other, wearing a dark flannel shirt that made him look thinner than I remembered, and more ordinary than I wanted. There are some people you expect to remain dramatic forever, even after the drama is over. James was not one of those people. The thing that startled me was how unremarkable he looked now. No dealership shine, no church polish, no marriage left to perform. Just a man eating breakfast in a room with cracked vinyl seats and a waitress who called everyone honey because she had stopped needing names. I stood by the hostess stand with a paper cup in my hand and watched him for a second too long. He had not seen me. That should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like distance taking the shape of a person. The waitress asked if I wanted a booth, and I said yes without looking away from him. He turned a page. He added cream to his coffee. He was 2/3 of the way through the book and had underlined something on the page with a blue pen he must have found in his shirt pocket. I knew that pen. He used to keep one in the cup beside the microwave, the same place he used to leave his keys. It was a stupid, intimate detail to recognize in a man who no longer belonged to me, but grief is a machine for preserving useless facts. I took a booth at the back wall and ordered eggs I barely tasted. He was gone by the time I left. I didn't know if he'd seen me and chosen not to come over, or if the universe had been merciful enough to spare us both one more complicated conversation. By then, it no longer mattered. Our lives had already learned how to miss each other without making a scene. That was the shape of the year after. Not fireworks, not revenge, not a clean cinematic ending with doors slamming and music swelling and everybody finally understanding what they'd done. Just smaller. A smaller house in Decatur, smaller bills, smaller rooms, smaller lies. The townhouse was 700 square feet less than the one in Buckhead, which felt less like a downgrade than a correction. The windows faced a patch of maples and a neighbor's fence, with a bird feeder hanging crooked from one side. In the old house, every hallway had felt like a stage. In the new one, I could cross from the bedroom to the kitchen in 9 steps if I moved fast, 11 if I didn't. There was no formal dining room, which meant nobody could trap me in one. There was no room at the end of the hall that I had to pretend was just storage. I made that choice on purpose. I did not want a house that asked me to keep standing still. The first month after the divorce final, I lived like a person relearning her own weight. 4 days of work. 1 grocery run on Thursdays, laundry on Saturdays, eggs on Sundays, tea at night because my mother still believed warm liquids could fix what panic had done to my nervous system. Some days that routine felt like peace. Some days it felt like being placed on a shelf and told to be grateful for the dust. Helen came by twice a week at first, then once, then whenever she wanted to remind me I was still somebody's daughter. She would arrive with groceries I hadn't asked for, or a pot of soup, or a new candle she insisted would make the place less funeral home adjacent. She never asked me how I was unless she was prepared to accept a lie. That was the gift she gave me most often. Not silence, permission. When I cried, she did not rush me out of it. When I didn't cry, she did not congratulate me. If I was staring into the middle distance with a plate in my hand, she would take it from me, wash it, and set it on the drying rack like she was teaching me by example that no one is built to carry everything at once. I learned the post-divorce rhythm the way you learn the layout of a new city. The coffee shop on the corner where they remembered my order by the 3rd visit. The park with the pond where the geese behaved badly in early spring. The dry cleaner who looked at me once and decided not to ask questions about the absence of a wedding ring. The way Saturday mornings could be quiet without being lonely if I let them be. Sometimes I still caught myself reaching for the old reflexes. My thumb would move toward my phone when I left work, as if James might send a text asking if I wanted takeout, or if I'd seen the paper, or if I could pick up batteries on the way home. Muscle memory is humiliating that way. It doesn't care what your life became. It just remembers the habit of another one. Eventually, the thumb stopped reaching. That felt like grief too. The house in Buckhead sold in less than 3 weeks. Julie Ramirez got her price. Priya got the paperwork filed. I signed where I was told. James signed where he had to. The day the closing went through, I walked through the empty rooms one last time and stood in the master bath, where I had sat in the tub with my dress still on tan, and thought about chipped beef and shock, and the strange places the mind goes when it refuses to break in public. The bathroom was gutted by then. New owners had already started tearing out the tile. The hallway was stripped of our photos. The kitchen was bare except for the light over the island, which still cast the same thin white glare on the same slab of marble where I had once told him to sit down and answer for himself. There are houses that hold memories, and there are houses that keep them. That one was both. I did not take anything sentimental from it. No framed vows, no wine glasses, no wedding gift china. I kept practical things. The good chef's knives, my drafting table, the book of Daniel's school drawings that I had hidden in a cabinet and forgotten to look at for months at a time. The rest I let go. That should have felt like cleansing. Mostly it felt like inventory. The first real peace I had came from ordinary repetition, the little things I could do without flinching, folding towels, paying bills on time, cooking just enough. Learning that loneliness and emptiness are not the same thing, no matter how often people confuse them. I also learned that silence is not always absence. Sometimes silence is a wall. Sometimes it is a room no one enters because everybody is waiting for the other person to open the door. I had lived too long inside that kind of silence to mistake it for maturity again. It was 5 months after the divorce when Sarah's card arrived. Helen brought it over in an envelope. She had opened and reclosed, and opened again before deciding I should see it. That was my mother's way with dangerous objects. She did not always prevent impact. She made sure I saw the shape of it before it hit. The card was cream-colored, with a tiny photograph on the front of a baby wrapped in a pale yellow blanket. One hand was curled at her mouth. The other was reaching out, blurry with motion, as if she already expected the world to come closer. Inside, Sarah's handwriting was neat and controlled, the kind of handwriting people use when they are trying not to tremble. The baby was a girl. Maya Joan Chan, not Ashford. Sarah had held that line, and somehow I respected her more for it. The note was brief. She said Maya was healthy. She said James was kind to her. She said this was not an invitation to reopen anything, only a way to let the child exist in a world that knew her name. She said she understood if I threw the card away. I did not. I sat at the kitchen table and read the note 3 times while my mother watched me from the stove. She didn't ask what it said. She didn't need to. She knew from my face that the baby was real and that the world had continued in spite of us. I put the card in the cheddar box I kept in the dining nook, the one with the old lid and the soft corners and the things too heavy to throw out, but too real to display. A card, a hospital bracelet from Daniel's room that I had found in a drawer years later, a pressed magnolia petal from the cemetery. A photo of Helen in her 30s with her hair in a scarf and her arms folded like she already knew too much about patience. Then, because I could not stop myself, I wrote a letter to Maya. I did not send it. There was no address, and that was only one of the reasons. I wrote it on thin cream stationery at the little desk by the window, the one place in the townhouse where the light came in clean enough to make me feel like my thoughts had edges again. Maya, I began, and then I stopped because the word looked too fragile for what I wanted to say. I started again. You do not know me, I wrote, but I know your name. I told her I was the woman her father had married before she was born. I told her I was not angry at her. I told her I was not angry at her mother either. I told her Sarah had done a difficult thing by coming to the church, and that difficult things are not the same as cruel ones. I told her there are parts of grown-up life nobody explains to children, because adults are often as much damage they can cause while trying to protect themselves. Then I stopped and stared at the page. It was impossible to explain a war without sounding like someone trying to justify one, so I changed tactics. I wrote about Daniel. I told her her half-brother had loved bridges. I told her he once asked me why a bridge had to hold itself up and everyone else up too, and who was supposed to support the bridge when it got tired. I told her I had no answer when he asked, but I had one now. Other people hold it up. That was the answer. Not one person, not the strongest person, not the person who never sits down, other people. I told her Daniel's name out loud every week now. I told her I was sorry it had taken me so long to understand that silence was not love, and endurance was not the same thing as strength. I folded the letter carefully and put it in the box. I did not seal it. Some things are meant to remain unfinished until the day they are not. By the time summer came, I was ready for the cemetery, not prepared. Ready. There is a difference. Prepared means you think you can control what happens when you arrive. Ready means you've stopped pretending the arrival is the important part. It was a Saturday in June, bright and already hot before noon, when I carried the bridge across Westview in a cardboard box I had cut handles into myself. I had spent 6 weeks making it in the spare room, now a study, on the same old drafting table I'd dragged from the Buckhead house. Balsa wood, piano wire, white glue, a scale model built from Daniel's old drawing, corrected and strengthened and tested until it could take weight without collapsing. It was not a toy. It was not a monument either. It was a promise. The cemetery was quiet in the way old places are quiet when they have outlived most of the noise people bring with them. The grass had been cut recently. The air smelled like damp earth and cut stems. Somewhere a mower buzzed and stopped and buzzed again. I found his stone without thinking too hard about the path, because grief teaches the body geography long after the mind has given up on maps. I set the box down. I took the bridge out with both hands. It was lighter than it had any right to be and stronger than it looked. I placed it carefully across the base of the headstone, stone to stone, as if I were testing whether the world might finally honor an equation I had delayed for too long. It held. For a moment I just looked at it. Then I sat down in the grass with my knees bent and the sunlight warm on the back of my neck and said his name out loud. Daniel, no whisper, no apology, no flinching. Just the name, as if naming him were an act of returning rather than losing. I told him the bridge worked. I told him I should have answered his questions sooner. I told him I had spent too many years confusing self-control with courage. I told him the house was smaller now and the air was better in it. I told him I had stopped checking my phone for a life that no longer existed. I told him I missed him less like an ache and more like weather now. That was not betrayal. It was what time had made possible. While I was still talking, I heard a familiar cough from behind me. Not dramatic, not intrusive. Just careful. I turned. James was standing on the gravel path with a bunch of white daisies in one hand and a grocery store sack in the other. He looked older in the honest way of men who have been forced to live with consequences. His posture was different, not bent exactly, but less defended, like a man who had stopped trying to occupy as much space as he could. He did not look surprised to see me, which told me he had probably known I came on Saturdays now. Or maybe he had come hoping I would be there. Those two possibilities are different in theory and identical in a cemetery. He waited. I lifted one hand in the smallest possible greeting, the kind that says, I see you without inviting anything else. He approached the stone and set the daisies on the far side, giving me the space he should have learned to give years ago. Then he stayed standing. We let the silence settle between us. It wasn't the old silence, not the wall, not the punishment. This one had air in it. The bridge, he said at last, looking down at it. Daniel drew it. I know. I built it. I know that too. He swallowed once, then nodded toward the stone. I come the first Saturday of every month. I know. I didn't know whether you still did. I do when I can. He glanced at me, then back at the bridge. His voice was quieter than I remembered. How's Maya? I looked at him for a long second before answering. You see her twice a month, I said. You know how Maya is. Something in his face moved at that. Not guilt exactly. Recognition. I got the card, I said. He nodded. Sarah said she sent it. She did. He looked down at the grass. She wanted you to know the baby exists. I know. She said she wasn't asking for anything. I know. He stood with his hands empty at his sides now, as if he had forgotten what to do with them in a room where no one was asking him to perform. I'm sorry, he said. It was not the first time he had said it. It was, I think, the first time he meant the whole shape of it. I looked at the daisies, at the bridge, at the stone with Daniel's name carved into it. Then I looked back at him. "I know you are," I said. He nodded once, and I could see that he wanted to say more, but had finally learned the dignity of stopping when there was nothing useful left to be offered. So he did the one thing he could still do. He looked at the stone and said, very softly, "Hi, buddy." Daniel's name had been said in this place before, but somehow hearing it offered like that in the open air changed something in my chest. Not healed it, changed it. James stepped back after that and gave me the room to sit alone with our son, which was the closest thing to respect we had ever managed at the end. He stayed maybe a minute longer, then turned and walked back up the path toward the trees and his truck and whatever we had managed to salvage, on the far side of what we had both done. I watched him go until the shape of him thinned against the light and disappeared. Then I sat with Daniel for a while longer and told him about the townhouse, the books on my desk, the plant Helen kept killing and replacing without admitting defeat. I told him about the card in the box. I told him Maya had his eyebrows and that this had somehow made me angry and tender at the same time. I told him his bridge held. That mattered more than I knew how to explain to anyone who hadn't spent years trying to support everything alone. When I finally stood up, I put my palm on the stone and felt the warmth it had gathered from the sun. I thought about all the years I had spent believing that endurance was the same thing as strength. That if I could just keep my voice level, keep the house standing, keep my face composed, keep my grief contained, then I was doing something noble. I wasn't. I was isolating myself inside an act of survival and calling it discipline. The truth, which took me longer than I'd like to admit to understand, is that silence can look a lot like dignity from the outside. It can even feel like love if you have lived with it long enough. But silence can also be a way of making sure nobody notices how much you are carrying until the bridge starts to bend. I used to think surviving meant standing. Now I know sometimes survival is finally sitting down, saying the name, and letting the bridge hold you. And if you are listening to this and someone came to mind, I want you to sit with that thought longer than is comfortable. Who in your life is standing under the weight alone, because everybody has mistaken their silence for strength? Who has been holding up the bridge while the rest of you kept walking across it?